We're ready to get started. Today we're going to cover real-time cyber situational awareness for IoT and industrial control environments. First part of the agenda is I'd like to cover the IoT threat landscape for industrial control systems specifically. And I apologize. My name is Sanjay Raja. I run marketing for Lumeta Corporation. And joining me on this webinar is also Joe Sorial, who is our head of our products. And he'll provide a little more technical context as well as we will offer a demo at the end as well. So as we talk about the threat landscape around IoT, but specifically around industrial control systems, what we are seeing is that ICS attacks in IoT are becoming much more common, and we can see that the number of companies that have been impacted in the last 12 months and suffer at least one attack, based on going after critical infrastructure, is about 67%. So, we do hear a lot in the news around utility companies being targeted. Certainly nation-state attacks, looking at critical infrastructure for certain countries. So we see that as a very common premise, but we've also seen a lot of attacks that have targeted manufacturing as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the attacks that have occurred over the last year. When we look at the survey on the left, and we see a lot of CISOs or CIOs that are responsible for protecting the environment, they do expect a successful exploit some of their systems in the next 2 years. It's kind of a sad statement. It shows that there are a lot of concerns around, the ability to secure these environments, and people are looking for solutions, but there are so many different solutions out there that are kind of coming out of the woodwork. Again, like a lot of other security areas, this is another confusing area where a lot of the messaging is the same. So confidence is very low right now in terms of really being able to protect these environments, especially in what we're seeing in the news. When we look at, the actual cyber threats that are going on out there, conventional malware is still very high. So typical, malware and virus outbreaks targeting general purpose operating systems is still one of the biggest factors here. We're seeing ransomware as well, but what's interesting, we're seeing some sabotage or, intentional damage being done too, as well as threats from third parties. Again, so those are some interesting areas where it shows that it's just not about malware. It's also about, securing your resources, and segmentation and those type of things can really help with some of these, areas of incidents that have occurred. But we also look at APTs are still very high. So it may not be the highest concern, but it is number 2 on the list. So between malware and APTs, more traditional attack vectors are still being used against these environments. Nothing very customized as people may expect. So the other portion too is around misconfigurations, and this leads back to, am I securing my assets appropriately, and can I prevent unauthorized usage or access from even internal users? If I look at a little bit of the attacks that have occurred and some of the targets this year, I mentioned manufacturing. The ransomware attack, WannaCry, is considered an IoT attack based on some of the environments they went after. Certainly healthcare systems, but the other one was around manufacturing. So an example of that is that Honda Motor Company got infected, and one of its plants was disrupted for, I think it was a few days, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, they halted production of the factory floor until they could remediate the issue. Again, there was a high dollar cost associated with that, as they had to delay a lot of shipments. Excuse me. When we look at Petya specifically, again, traditional malware, ransomware type of attack, that was the follow-up to WannaCry. They were really able to target, Chernobyl nuclear power plant. I didn't even realize Chernobyl was still open, but apparently it was, and there's still operations going on there. Excuse me. They had to switch their systems to have people walk around with manual monitoring systems that could do it, without the use of some of their computer systems. So they had to switch to that while the actual, infrastructure was down. We saw a lot of infections around point-of-sale terminals and ATMs as well, so this impacted the financial industry too. And we kind of, lump in some of these systems as IoT, excuse me, mainly because, they are very much, traditionally customized operating systems, not normally network systems. And as time has passed, they have become, again, much more general purpose, and a lot of the older machines are being replaced by, ones that are running Linux or even Windows for that matter. So we are seeing a major shift in terms of these areas too. The Russian oil company Rosneft as well got their servers infected. So Again, this was impacting utilities, pharmaceutical, retail. All these different industries were hit pretty hard. And then, healthcare was hit specifically by WannaCry, NHS specifically in London, but certainly worldwide it had a pretty big impact. But they've discovered even some specific, malware that was created for the purpose of hijacking some of the healthcare systems, out there. It's called MedJack and MedJack 2. So again, they're seeing just an increase of ransomware across a variety of targets, but there are specific attacks being catered to some of these areas. Again, traditional malware APTs are being formulated for these purposes. So when we look at the economic impact specifically, we're seeing that the average cost of an attack on, a typical ICS system is about $347,000. That's based on what has been reported. We expect there's quite a few companies that don't talk about the level of breach they've had, but this is based on being able to gather public information. The cost for larger companies, certainly, over 500, which is still not very large, was much higher. So, around 500,000. So there are clearly a number of attacks going on in very small organizations as well that are, again, specific to IoT attacks or ICS attacks. When we look at, the impact on, ransomware specifically, just because it's been a high-profile issue lately, especially this year, it seems like the rise of ransomware has been pretty extreme. We're seeing that certainly consumers are impacted. Quite a few actually had their resources, hijacked. The larger band, up until this year, tended to be local and state governments. In the last 2 years especially, there's been a lot of going after, police organizations or town halls or city halls, that kind of thing, and locking down records, criminal records, things like that. This year is where we've seen the rise of companies being hit more actively, and you can see that in terms of, hitting these particular organizations, 70% of the time, you're paying out some sort of sum, and that number actually, 20% of the time, that number is over $40,000. So it's very lucrative, and we see that, this is going to continue, right? It's an easy way to make money. And again, use traditional mechanisms to be able to penetrate networks, and certainly that's true of industrial control systems. As I mentioned, Honda was hit pretty hard, but there were quite a few other manufacturing facilities that were hit by this ransomware attack, as well as utility companies. So we expect ransomware to be a big part of this attack vectoring. The other area too that's of interest is, we're seeing a lot of news about the skills gap, in terms of the ability for organizations to handle these new security threats. And, there's a lot of different reasons for that. We are seeing that even in traditional IT organizations or enterprises, we see a lot of influx of junior security analysts, and it takes some time to come up to speed, and they certainly don't always have the network context that a senior analyst would have, or someone that spent a lot of time in the networking area that may have switched over to security. So again, it's one issue, and the other issue too is that in a lot of utility companies, manufacturing, you're having to expand a lot of your security personnel as you start to secure, operating, OT environments as an example. So again, it requires a different skill set, but with still a strong level of security knowledge. So again, it's very difficult to fill those gaps. What we're seeing is that the need for better tools, especially around monitoring, to be able to automate, being able to find threats, being able to understand when there are vulnerabilities or patches that are a problem. Certainly reducing the complexity of networks can help as well. Solutions that are making sure that, communications between IT and OT environments, is fairly secure, so that you're not, having that spill of traffic and infections that can hit your IT network, spill over into your critical infrastructure, especially again on the utility side, on power grid, things like that, but manufacturing and healthcare as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to security challenge for IoT. I'm actually going to have Joe Sorial present on my behalf. So give me 1 second to be able to switch over.
And while Sanjay's doing that, I'll just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Joe Soriel. I am VP of Product Management at Lumeta. And now I do have control. Let me see if you can see my screen, Sanjay. Let me know if you see my screen.
Yes, I can. You can, Joe.
Okay, great. So I'm VP Product Management for Lumeta. I'm responsible for roadmap. We'll be walking through some of the challenges with securing IoT, as well as some best practices. Kick it over back to Sanjay to do a quick overview about Lumeta and our solutions, and then we'll get into a demo. So when we look at the challenges with securing IoT, and I think a lot of the folks that are on the line are probably as familiar with this as we all are, is that a lot of these smaller devices, these dedicated industrial control devices, whether they're valves or flow meters or any type of controllers, are very, very small footprint, very, very low power. They're really designed to do one thing, do it well, and do it for a very, very long time. And a lot of these devices are also legacy devices. They've been around, since the, call it, 90s, 80s, thereabouts. They weren't really built with security in mind. They were really optimized to be lower cost, high operating efficiency, low power consumption. So really, the notion of security back then wasn't really something that folks thought about when they designed these very small, very specialized units. There's also the notion of, because they are small, they're running very basic, very simplistic operating systems, which really leads us to the next set of challenges, is that patching these devices and patching these very specialized endpoints becomes very difficult. Because they're small power, small footprint, low power, low compute, oftentimes they're running custom operating systems or modified off-the-shelf operating systems. And these operating systems don't tend to be patched for vulnerabilities on a regular basis. So even though the ones that are patchable, because there are new releases out there that handle some of the vulnerabilities, it may be difficult to get to some of those systems. So, between the fact that a lot of the devices don't have new modern operating systems, the ones that do have modern operating systems that are patched end up becoming very difficult to patch. And the reason for that is when we look at some of the networks and some of the utilities that these devices are participating in, these are 100% availability type networks and environments. So, turning off a power plant, for example, or turning off a manufacturing line isn't something that, you do, for a couple of minutes, do your patch and you're ready to go. It takes time to spin these things down. It takes time to spin them back up. And, going to the general public and saying things like, well, you're going to lose water or power or what have you for a couple of days while we go ahead and patch is just not something that's tractable. So really, these are the challenges that make it difficult to operate and to properly secure IoT industrial control type systems. To exacerbate the problem, there's not really a framework that's available and in place that says here are best practices for securing an OT environment. The reason for that is it's new and every environment is different. So it becomes very, very difficult to say, here's a best practices framework that works for everybody. Focusing on the endpoints also becomes very challenging in that, again, those endpoints are all over the place. They're not really centrally located, may not know exactly where they are and what's out there, which actually adds to the complexity. So because of all of these issues and all of these challenges, the consensus really is to focus on protecting the network, protecting the infrastructure as a whole, as opposed to what we do in a typical IT environment, which is really securing the endpoint. So adding to the challenges is looking at what's out there in terms of what can readily, off the shelf in terms of other security vendors be used to secure an OT environment. And we, I think right now the focus is on NAC and endpoint solutions. We've sort of talked about endpoint solutions of why that may not be tractable given the types of OSs and the variety of OSs, both off-the-shelf and non-off-the-shelf OSs are out there. But looking at network access controllers, so NACs, SIMs, net flow collectors, a lot of these devices do a really good job in their respective areas. So NACs, can allow and disallow endpoints from joining a network based on policy and things like that pretty easily. But they don't really have the network context. They can't really tell you, oh, is there another segment of the network that I don't have visibility into that I'm not actively managing? Same thing with SIMs. SIMs do a great job of correlating and analyzing logs from devices that they know about and have access to those logs on those devices. But we all know logs can be, disabled, modified, and that's usually the first thing that the bad guys do when they get into the network and before they start kicking off their malicious activity. NetFlow and vulnerability scanners do a good job of collecting and scanning the environments that they know about. But again, deployment, may be limited, especially in environments that may be far-flung and remote. So really, when you look at the state of the security industry, a lot of the focus is on device profiling. There's not really an awareness into real-time changes of how those networks are behaving, how devices are behaving, what's joining, and how it's affecting my network topology. And then, finally, if there are segmentation rules in place, the dynamic nature of our environments make it really difficult to make sure that segmentation policies are in place, are being enforced, and that things are protected at the network level as they should be. So when we look at IoT defense strategies, with everything that we've discussed in mind, the idea there is the OT network should be very well protected. It should be very well understood. Obviously, we all have that awareness. We all understand that. But in order to be able to do that, we really need to understand what is going on in the OT environment. And really, that mantra does extend to the normal enterprise as well. But because of the sensitivity of OT, that's really the focus of the conversation here. So what I have here is a scenario set up where I have a security operations center, an OT environment that's segmented away from everything, hopefully, and an IT network. And what we want to be able to do here is understand all network changes in real time. So that includes things like listening for things like BGP route updates, listening to OSPF, listening to broadcast, and being alerted about those changes because the network knows what's joining what's joining. So we want to be able to tap into that and understand what those devices are and how they're behaving. And once we learn about some of these announcements, we want to go off and, to the extent that we can and we feel comfortable, probe into those routes, probe into those devices to get better context about what they are and how they're behaving. So once we understand what our network looks like, especially in an OT environment, we want to make sure that it's properly segmented from the rest of the world, essentially. So making sure that our segmentation policies are in place so that there isn't a connection between my IT network and an OT network, or no unauthorized connections outside of the bare minimum that we know we need. And even more importantly, make sure that there aren't any unauthorized connections or any connections between the internet and the OT network. And the way we do that is with Lumeta, we have some proprietary techniques around forcing a packet in and out of a network and alerting when that packet actually makes it through and across our segmentation boundary. And again, you want to be able to do that in real time, and you also want to be able to retest for segmentation violations as the network changes. So if a new device joins the network, make sure that it's not bridging or doing anything to facilitate access from the OT network to the outside world. And now that we understand our network infrastructure, we understand our devices, and we understand how it's changing in real time, we validate our segmentation. The next step is to validate that there isn't any breach activity going on from within that enclave. So what we want to do here is capture things like NetFlow, and we Lumeta don't actually capture NetFlow. We actually ingest NetFlow from other sources, aggregators, switches, what have you. And we want to take that NetFlow information, correlate it with threat intelligence data, correlate it with things like Tor lists, so those are exit and relay nodes, and make sure that there isn't any breach type activity happening in my OT environment. And we do that by comparing source and destination IP addresses as captured from NetFlow, comparing those with IP addresses in threat intelligence data, in the Tor list, and making sure that there isn't any type of conversations that are happening that may be considered nefarious. And as soon as we're able to identify that one end of the conversation is going to a known bad actor or Tor, because we have that holistic network view and device view that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, we're now able to pinpoint which device is responsible for that communication so that we can roll out either new segmentation rules or take action against that specific device by quarantining it or disabling it. So between the three pillars column, understanding real-time network changes and device changes, understanding segmentation violations in real time, and identifying bad network behavior and bad conversations, we can now have a handle on our entire OT network and make sure that it's locked down and secure. So let me pause here. I'll turn it back to Sanjay, give us a brief overview about Lumeta, and then we'll drill into our demo.
All right, great. Thank you, Joe. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of Lumeta. Nothing too extensive. Just want to kind of cover a few base points. So in terms of Lumeta, our flagship product is Lumeta Specter, and we offer 100% real-time infrastructure visibility, real-time change monitoring and threat detection. When we do that, we don't use agents, but we are focused on IP-enabled devices. So anything that has an IP address is what we are able to offer in terms of this, when I talk about infrastructure visibility and change monitoring. And that's really where we're focused on, as Joe talked about, some of the challenges that a lot of companies have around being able to understand the infrastructure at that level, but certainly between IT and OT environments as well. That needs to be IP traffic going back and forth. We, are able to eliminate all the blind spots, and the way we're able to do that is that we can find 40% more IPs and even whole networks beyond any other solution out there. Regardless of whether it's an ACK or any sort of security analytics solution, certainly any sort of vulnerability assessment solutions. Really where our focus is to be able to find all that infrastructure, and we have some very unique capabilities for doing that. As part of our ability to find the infrastructure, we're also able to monitor it using similar technology in terms of any sort of dynamic change that occurs. So we can watch an endpoint, a network, any sort of path that occurs, especially a path change that may be bleeding out from your perimeter as soon as it occurs. And that's very unique. We don't rely on things like continuous monitoring, for example, or which is really polling of devices. We're actually able to see things as they change in real time, and we have different active and passive listening techniques that enable that. As part of that, what we found, and we'll cover this in a minute, is that we can uncover huge amounts of leaks within an organization, especially the internet. So that's true whether you're trying to secure specific enclaves or your manufacturing floor from the rest of your IT network. We can determine if there are paths that are not authorized between those environments, but also see any sort of either paths that have been left open that may go to the internet. Certainly from your OT environment, you wouldn't want that to happen. But if one is created, we'll also detect that and say, hey, here's a new leak path that's been formulated, probably indicative of an attack or some sort of malware that's trying to communicate outside. As we've discovered that leak path, we can also apply security intelligence to that to be able to detect whether that flow is actually unauthorized, to be able to see whether that leak is encrypted. Joe mentioned Tor nodes where we're sending stuff across Tor. Most enterprises and companies restrict Tor traffic pretty severely, if not completely block it. So if that's starting to happen on your network and it's being able to escape, it's probably indicative of an attacker being able to obfuscate data that's being leaked out. Certainly command and control activity when you're sending data to a known malware site. We can identify a lot of these common attacks based on our knowledge of the network and the infrastructure there. But again, we're detecting this stuff in real time. When we look at, our ability to do that, and I mentioned that we, the 40% number, we're able to find 40% above and beyond other solutions. This is when you have next-gen AV or IPAM, vulnerability assessment software, NAC, solutions that support DPI like IPS and, security analytics solutions, and certainly even NetFlow. We're still able to find a huge number of endpoints, and that endpoint visibility gap, which is the third line, is really where the delta between the list that we're given and known assets that are talked to us about, these different areas, these different verticals, versus what we actually discover once we've been installed. So again, you can see that especially in the finance area as an example, there's a huge delta in terms of what they know about and manage actively, and secure for that matter, versus what we find. This is of significant interest, of course, to an industrial control environment, but the other areas too are actually very big. When you have things like unmanaged networks or shadow IT, certainly you're starting to see a lot more of, or it becomes very difficult to be able to discover how these networks are communicating across boundaries into your OT area. A malware actor can spin up in the OT environment a set of resources that may not be easily discoverable or found by other solutions because, again, they're not looking for those type of things. Certainly, unauthorized or unsecured forwarding devices means that I'm moving traffic around unexpectedly, whether it's a misconfiguration or it's an unauthorized user breaking into a router or switch and being able to create these forwarding paths. Security solutions out there don't look for that. They don't know that that's anomalous behavior. Network monitoring software doesn't either. It will note it, it will log that change occurring, but correlating that information in the security policy or some sort of SIM, for example, they don't know that those network changes may not be what you expect. Certainly being able to detect that in real time in an IT, OT environment or ICS environment is critical, because you wouldn't really expect a lot of changes to occur to the network outside of specified change windows or planned downtime. So if you're seeing these type of changes or new forwarding paths being created, it's probably indicative again of an attack. Same thing with leak paths, right? You would never expect a leak path to go from a manufacturing site out to the internet. You really want that traffic tunneled back into your IT environment if you need to, and then be able to have some sort of mechanism of being able to apply additional security controls there before it goes in and out of your OT environment. So in terms of how we work, we are really focused on being able to understand devices, paths, network communications at the edge within the core, and certainly able to find a certain level of rogue systems out there, whether it's shadow IT networks or stealth routers, unknown devices, or even wireless, LANs that have been set up illegally, which is a very common mechanism because they tend to be less secure, but is a great break-in entry point for an attacker. So these are the types of things we're looking for. When we apply, security intelligence to that, this is where we're able to offer the level of breach detection, and certainly understanding whether your endpoints are left unsecured and whether they're actually participating in malicious behavior. So again, this is really where our focus is understanding the network and everything attached to the network, again, IP-enabled, and being able to apply security intelligence to that to be able to unearth different events that are occurring. Certainly the same is true in an IT/OT environment or industrial control system environment. Despite that, we still believe that we are not an island to ourselves, right? We need to work within a security ecosystem. We need to work with vendors like Cisco, for example, that does a lot of device profiling and has some level of profiling for IoT and industrial control system environments, or certainly healthcare, right? We need to work with, companies like Gigamon or on the cloud to be able to, offer much more visibility. Certainly working with Qualys, for example, is another way that we can provide them a lot more information so they can be more effective at scanning potentially vulnerable systems. These are all areas that we have integrations with and work with to be able to provide much more comprehensive security, but help security operations teams, gather much more network context information so they can also remediate faster. So it's not just about being able to detect the threat more efficiently. It's also about, do I have the knowledge and information where a security team member can work with the network team to be able to find out where the resource is, lock it down more effectively, or quarantine it potentially. The faster I can do that, the less damage and impact happens to my organization. So really at Lumeta, what we look at is we are focused on being able to harden your systems, find blind spots, be able to determine your entire infrastructure, but also work with you to be able to help determine which ones are vulnerable so you can lock them down more effectively. This is whether it's a misconfiguration, whether it's an unpatched server, whether it's a new flaw that may have come up that was missed on your last vulnerability scan. Those type of assets we want to be able to discover, find, and be able to help you understand how to harden those more effectively before an attack starts. During an attack, or when an attack starts to take place, we can tell you some of those dynamic network changes that are suspicious. Understand when an endpoint is starting to send traffic somewhere that normally doesn't. Identify things like leak paths or threat behaviors that are basically access violations or indicative of malware or some sort of other threat actor trying to move around within the environment and, trying to either steal data or, again, enable ransomware to work or even, even cause some sort of damage potentially. And then after a breach, this is what I talked about earlier, is that our ability to improve the effectiveness of the security operations team to be able to remediate, to be able to clean up the attack and respond to it quickly. We provide a lot of network information and context that can be used with the network team or even the desktop application team that can come together more effectively and figure out what's the approach we need to take to quickly remediate and fix this problem, right? It's very common where we have customers that we've talked to that have discovered a breach or a threat activity, and yet they haven't been able to lock it down because it takes too long to be able to figure out the source of the attack, work with the various teams to be able to decide how to lock that attack down. And yet, even before data was stolen, they discovered the attack, and yet data was still stolen because they took too long. They took weeks or days to be able to figure out how do we control this particular breach before it has an impact. So the more that we can do after is very beneficial as well. As part of that, what we do is we can, because we're looking at the entire network infrastructure, we are able to operate, across the entire network. That includes being able to understand endpoints, IoT devices, potentially, but certainly also in virtual and cloud environments, which, we see a lot of even management of IoT devices or industrial control systems also being leveraging the cloud. So this is where, again, we can drop in and deploy in any of these environments just as well as we can on premise. And being able to do this in real time is unique to Lumeta. Lumeta, because of the way we work and the techniques we use, we are truly seeing things as they change, not on a polling interval or not, notified by an event like a log event. We really do see things as they change in the network itself. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Joe quickly to be able to do a quick demo. Sorry, Joe, you're all set.
Yep, thanks, Sanjay. Can you see my screen again?
Yep.
Okay, great. So before I get into the demo, just want to chat a little bit about Lumeta Specter and the architecture, because I think this also makes the product very, very unique and very, very easy to deploy. So Lumeta Specter is actually made up of two components. The brains of the operation we call the Lumeta Command Center. This is where our HDFS data store lives. This is where our UI lives. This is where all of the analysis and reporting and the advanced queries, that's really where all of that happens. And it's where the user goes to perform the configuration into what it is that they're interested in seeing from within the various networks that they're monitoring. The Command Center does have abilities to do both the passive listening techniques that I mentioned earlier around listening to BGP route updates and broadcast and OSPF and all of that. And it also has the capability of performing the active probing, which is actually putting packets on the wire based on what we're hearing. And all of that is very configurable, very tailored, very low impact on the network, if any. And it's also, all very well-formed packets in terms of being mindful of knocking things over. To the extent that the Command Center does not have protocol reach into some of the far-flung networks in the enterprise, we have what we call Lumeta Specter Scouts, which are virtual machines that get spun up in those areas, and they serve as eyes and ears for the Command Center. They basically get instruction sets based on the configuration. They perform their listening and or active indexing, and then they get all that data back to the Command Center for analysis. So you can see in this case, the Command Center would be sitting probably in the Security Operations Center, and there may be scouts in the IT network, in the cloud network, in the OT network, and all of those virtual machines are connected back to the Command Center. So with that, let me move over to our demo. And what I have here is a Lumeta Specter Command Center. It's configured for a couple of zones. Really the two most interesting ones are the IT network and the OT network, and that's just to simulate some of the things that we've chatted about. And the first thing that you see when you log into the Command Center is dashboards. The dashboards are very configurable, very easy. You can move them, you can size them, you can change them. Really, it's up to the user to do what they want. We come pre-canned with a whole bunch of different dashboards around some of the various use cases we've discussed, or users can create their own. Users also have the ability of making a dashboard their default, so that when they get into the product, they get to see what it is that's important to them without having to do a lot of clicking around. So the first dashboard we're going to start with is our breach detection dashboard. Again, this is where I mentioned that we're looking at ingesting net flow traffic and correlating it with threat intelligence data. And by the way, Lumeta Specter comes bundled with Accenture iDefense threat intelligence data, just to make some of these use cases more turnkey. So with every license that goes out the door, you also get a key to be able to access Accenture iDefense threat intelligence data. So I clicked on known bad bots on my chart here, and you can see that we give you a little bit more detail about some of the breach activity that we've detected. And we're showing the net flow source and destination IP address that we collected. And we show you the IP address that showed up in threat intelligence. So the 69 dot address is also my destination IP address. So this tells me that this is an outbound kind of communication between something in my infrastructure and this known bad actor. In addition to Accenture iDefense, we also can ingest threat intelligence from other sources, emerging threats, both paid and open source, as well as Tor. And then we also tell you what type of threat it is. So this is a known infected bot. We show you the risk score as shown by the threat intelligence data, the source and destination ports, and the protocols that are used, and which zone this communication happened in. So like I mentioned earlier, I have an IT network and an OT network. And again, we're able to pinpoint where the activity happens pretty quickly. So similar to the threat intelligence data, the other set of widgets in this dashboard are around Tor. So be able to identify Tor nodes in my infrastructure. Again, we're scraping the Tor list and comparing that data against the devices that we've discovered. So if there's something in the DMZ that's actually operating as part of the Tor network, we're able to identify those devices pretty very quickly. And doing a similar use case to threat flows, but this time with Tor flows. So again, we are correlating source and destination IP addresses and net flow along with along with the Tor data that we are scraping from GitHub. So again, you can see I have a destination IP address here. I have a source IP address, and the source IP address is actually an exit address in Tor. So I can go ahead and click to get additional information about this device since it is on my network. I'm going to go ahead and drill into the map. So Lumeta is actually fairly well known for our topology maps. We've been doing this for a very, very long time. And you can see here's my OT network. The device that's highlighted is actually the device that's participating in my Tor node. I can right-click on this device to get additional details about it, find out additional metadata about what it is and how it's been behaving over time. So you can see that this device is active. It's not SNMP accessible. Here's the type of discovery that it responded to. I can get additional information about what this device is. So this is actually a virtual machine that's running Linux. I've interrogated these ports that came back closed. I've interrogated these ports that came back open, and so on and so forth. So from there, let me go back to the map and spend a little time here because I think folks on the phone may find this interesting. So the map is actually a real-time map. It updates in real time as new devices are discovered, and it's shown. You can expand all the way down to the hosts and the endpoints, so you can get a very good view as to what's going on here. And a new feature we actually just released with Specter 3.2.7 is the ability to export these maps in multiple different ways. So you can actually export the map as a PNG. So basically, you just get a flat file of this map and these icons. But I think what's even more interesting is being able to export these maps into Visio. And it takes a couple of seconds. Actually, it's already done. But I do have an exported map here that I can show you. And this is something that can be shared with teams that may not necessarily have access to Lumeta Specter in terms of network planning or for audits or what have you. So it makes things very, very easy, and Visio is obviously a tool that's favored by both the network and security folks. So going back to Lumeta Specter, I want to spend some time and talk about some of the integrations. So Sanjay mentioned that we participate in a fairly large ecosystem with other products because the data we have is valuable to a lot of these other solutions. So I mentioned ingesting some of the open source feeds. So you can see we have emerging threats and Tor, as well as the ISC. This is the Internet Storm Center open port list. This can guide some of the discovery around which ports are open and which ones may be infected or associated with infection. Subscription mentioned emerging threats and Accenture iDefense. This comes bundled in with Lumeta Specter. And then other solutions are really focused around, Gigamon for ingestion, NetFlow aggregation and ingestion, Carbon Black and McAfee for endpoint, Infoblox for IPAM, Cisco PXGrid, and Qualys for vulnerability management. And this list grows, basically with every release. Every release we generally have either an update, an enhancement to these integrations, or we actually have brand new integrations around, be it another vulnerability management solution or a device modeler or endpoint or what have you. So this list, grows, several times a year in terms of new additions. But speaking of this, I just want to take a minute and show you the EPO dashboard. This is where we share our information with McAfee endpoint solution. And what we're doing here is via an extension, we are pulling the list of devices that McAfee EPO knows about, and we're bouncing it against the list of devices that Lumeta Specter is able to discover. And the goal of this integration is to make sure that the other third-party solutions have awareness or an insight into devices that may not necessarily be managed by them. So we pull the list of devices that they know about, we bounce it against the list of devices that we know about, and we highlight the deltas. So we show that this is a list of devices that are unmanaged by EPO, and the widget on the bottom here shows a list of devices where there is overlap, where Lumeta Specter does know about them and EPO knows about them as well. And we don't just stop there in terms of reporting. We actually push the list of unmanaged devices into EPO, and we end up populating the rogue system detection dashboard. So you can see here are the list of devices that Lumeta Specter was able to find that is not currently under management by EPO. And there's a couple of breakdowns here in terms of what makeup is of these devices. So from here, it's very, very easy to just go ahead and click on that device, go ahead and select it, and go ahead and say, okay, well, if it doesn't have an agent on it, we need to go ahead and deploy an agent. And to the extent that EPO has AD creds, for example, to that device, an agent could be spun up pretty quickly, and now that device can be secured and managed appropriately. From here, let me spend a little time on the reporting. So much like there's a bunch of real-time dashboards that come out of the box, there's also a bunch of reports that come out of the box as well around getting a census of all the devices, getting a census of all the certificates that we're able to collect, looking at things like expired certificates that need to be addressed, for example, getting a summary of what's expired and what's valid, looking at leaks. So these are devices that have a leak associated with them. And I'll get into that in a moment in one of the dashboards. Looking at things like what's the makeup of my network, so getting a vendor summary of what vendors are out there and clicking in to get additional detail about what those devices are. In terms of leaking devices, there is a dashboard called the Dynamic Edge. So here in this use case, as I mentioned, we have a scout sitting in my IT network and a scout sitting in the internet. And now we're able to identify unauthorized communication that's happening from within out or from the outside in. So we have two widgets here. One is around inbound leaks, one is about outbound leaks. And you can see all of the devices that have been deemed to be having a leak. And then from there, I can go ahead again and drill in to get additional details about what that device is, figure out who makes it, how it's connected, and all of the information associated with it. So, here we go, device details. This happens to be, again, another virtual machine. And we actually also give you an idea of how the device responded. This is actually how we end up fingerprinting the device. And from there, users can rely on the Lumeta provided fingerprint, or to the extent that they prefer to create their own fingerprint, we give you the ability of creating a device profile on your own, so that from that point forward, once the fingerprint is uploaded, that device gets displayed and reported on in whichever way you decide to have that presented. So with that, I'm just going to pause here and send it back to Sanjay.
Great, thanks everyone. Would appreciate everyone attending today. I would like to open it up for questions from anybody. If you would like to ask them, I will unmute your lines, but also we have a chat window available, or sorry, question window available that you can submit a question. Looks like to be able to ask a question, you have to have put in your PIN code. So if you didn't put that in, I will not be able to unmute you, but other than that, you can certainly ask a question in the chat window, or sorry, the question window that we have set up. So I think we have one question that has come in. One of the questions that was sent privately just to me was, when we look at, is the customer's concerned with IT and OT environments, and whether we see a lot of leak paths or paths out of OT environments into the internet. We do see that, you know, when we go into an organization, we do end up finding, especially on the IT side, we can find anywhere from 100 to even thousands of leak paths, which is kind of alarming. But in general, in the OT environment, we will find a handful. You don't see that as prevalent there because those systems are a little bit more locked down, but even a single leak path is, you know, an attacker can either exploit or maybe it was set up by an attacker. You know, at the moment we find one, you know, we have to dig a little deeper to find out really how that was created. You know, again, this is when we're first installed, we find, you know, leak paths already present within the network. But certainly, you know, over time, because we're tracking any sort of change that occurs, we can determine if a new leak path has sprung up. In that case, that tends to be attack activity versus just misconfiguration. But certainly, you know, again, while we're in the environment, we get first installed, we'll find leak paths, and those tend to be more just misconfigured type. But, you know, in OT environments, again, it tends to be a little more of a handful. What we do see a lot more of is a lot of leak paths between IT and OT. And it used to be that was very rare. You know, you had more custom OS or networks or, you know, much more, you know, older archaic systems. But as they, you know, have become more IP enabled, or at least their control or management stations have become IP enabled, at least we do see in that case, again, a lot more leak paths that are coming up. So that is definitely an area where we see a huge number as well. But those are kind of the two, you know, there are three primary areas we look for. We look for anything bleeding out of the IT environment, of course. That's our traditional enterprise focus that we have as a company. But we also can see, again, between IT and OT, and the third is that, you know, obviously bleeding out of OT, which is the largest concern, I would say. Second being IT to OT when there's a leak path that's created. So that was a really good question. Let's see. The other question that has come up is around, you know, being able to do profiling and device profiling. So, you know, while we discover and can generally characterize an endpoint, I think Joe showed some of that in his window there in his demo. You know, our goal is not to be able to have like a rich, huge device profile database. Again, we can give you key information about a specific device, you know, operating system, other details, certainly IP address, those type of things, just so, you know, from a network standpoint, you can find that device, figure out how to lock it down. But, you know, we do partner with Cisco ICE specifically, and Cisco, you know, offers a solution that does do device access control and profiling. But, you know, their profiling is based on being able to pull some level of user context as well as, you know, understand the device as an iPad, as an example, versus an iPhone. So we work with them to be able to provide, you know, feed them information and provide them better information around what we're discovering. And yes, we could also, you know, potentially be able to pull in some of their information if we needed to. But really the idea is that we're working with them for that particular area. But natively, again, we're focused on being able to understand the network, all the devices connected, the communication path, as well as, you know, discover all the endpoint infrastructure that's attached, that's IP enabled, whether it's something that's meant, you know, that attackers try to hide or is a rogue system or shadow IT or not, we'll still find it. And that's really what we're trying to do, really provide you better visibility and monitoring of the entire network infrastructure. So those are the two questions that I have in mind. Joe, do you have any questions that have popped up in your question window? Again, you can send to all of us in privately. I guess I've gotten both privately, but do you have anything that's come up, based on your demo or anything else that you wanted to share? I think Joe may be on mute, but. All right, well, I guess that's probably a case that Joe does not have somebody there, and that's fine. What I would want to point out is that we do have a bunch of resources online. We do have dedicated resources, a data sheet, white paper as well, and we'll be posting this recording as well on our website. So if any of you would like to see it again or pass it off to someone else in our organization, that would be great. Again, I posted the actual URL in the chat window that everyone can see. So if there are questions, I think we're good. I appreciate everyone for attending today. And again, if you have any follow-up, please definitely contact someone at Lumeta, and we'll be happy to engage with you on a POC or certainly provide you more information if needed. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.